I thought the wilderness was supposed to be calming, a vast escape from the chaos of life. But out here, with the frigid night tightening its grip and the silence broken only by the rustling of unseen things, the forest wasn't serene. It was suffocating. The darkness didn't just surround you, it consumed you, pressing in like it had weight, turning every shadow into a threat. And somewhere, out there in that vast, unyielding black, something was watching. The wind carried a sound, low, guttural, and wrong. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the forest settling. It was alive, and it was hunting. My name's Andrew. I've always considered myself an outdoor enthusiast. Camping, fishing, hiking, the whole 9 yards. Missinaibi Lake Provincial Park had been on my bucket list for years, and with the pressures of city life weighing on me like a lead vest, it seemed like the perfect escape. Besides, I'd done my fair share of solo trips before. What was one more? But this one was different. I'd read about the park's rugged beauty, its sprawling landscapes and crystal-clear lakes, but I'd also heard whispers, hushed voices in online forums recounting tales of something lurking in the shadows. I brushed it off as campfire lore, the kind of nonsense you tell around a fire to spook your friends. Nothing I couldn't handle. So when I packed my gear and hit the road, I felt confident, maybe even cocky. I was ready to tackle the wilderness head-on. The drive up to Missinaibi was breathtaking. Towering pines lined the winding roads, their shadows stretching long and ominous as the sun dipped below the horizon. By the time I reached the ranger station, the day had melted into twilight, and the air carried a sharp chill. The ranger, a wiry man in his 40s, greeted me with a nod. His eyes darted to the gear in the back of my car. "You going solo?" I nodded. "Yeah, just a few days to clear my head." His expression tightened, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "You sure about that? Weather's been unpredictable lately. Could turn ugly." I laughed it off. "I've got all the essentials. I'll be fine." He hesitated, then slid a folded map across the counter. "Take this. The trails aren't as well marked as they used to be." I almost declined. After all, I had my GPS, but something in his tone gave me pause. "Thanks," I said, tucking the map into my pack. As I set out on the trail, the ranger called after me, his voice low and serious. "Stay safe out there." The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The trail wound through dense forest, the canopy overhead dappling the path with shifting sunlight. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine and damp moss. By mid-afternoon, I reached the edge of the lake, its surface gleaming like molten silver under the sun. Setting up camp, I felt that familiar rush of satisfaction, a tiny victory over the wild, a claim staked in the vastness. The water was icy but invigorating, and after a brisk swim, I stretched out by the fire, its warmth cutting through the cooling evening air. A steaming cup of instant coffee in hand, I watched the light fade, shadows creeping across the trees like a living thing. The night unfurled around me, bringing with it a symphony of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Somewhere distant, the faint crack of a branch broke the rhythm, but I told myself it was the wind. It was peaceful, idyllic, until it wasn't. It began with the smell, a faint, musky scent that drifted in on the breeze. I didn't think much of it at first, chalking it up to the natural aromas of the forest. But then the crickets fell silent. The hoot of the owl faded into an unnatural stillness, leaving only the crackle of the fire. A heavy stillness settled, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. The sound came next, a soft, deliberate rustling in the underbrush, too heavy for a rabbit or squirrel. I froze, my eyes straining to pierce the shadows just beyond the firelight. And there, just for a moment, I thought I saw it, a massive, lumbering silhouette, low to the ground, slipping between the trees. My breath caught in my throat. A bear, I thought. It had to be a bear. I stared into the darkness for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering in my chest. But the shape was gone. Only the rustling remained, fading into the night until even that was swallowed by the silence. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting encounter with nature's majesty. But as I lay in my tent that night, the musky scent lingered, curling into the edges of my dreams. And in those dreams, something watched. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of rustling outside my tent. It was faint at first, almost blending with the breeze that swept through the trees. I rolled over, groggy and disoriented, and told myself it was the wind. But the sound didn't fade. It grew steadier, more deliberate, each shuffle slicing through the quiet night like a blade. I lay there, ears straining, every muscle in my body taut with tension. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud it felt like it might drown out the noise. Then I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of a footfall on dry leaves. Not a shuffle or a scurry, but a weighty, deliberate step. Footsteps. I fumbled for my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. My breath fogged the cool air as I scanned the campsite. The fire had burned low, its embers casting a faint orange glow that flickered against the trees, making the shadows sway and writhe like living things. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the clearing. My backpack was still propped against the tree where I'd left it, and the remnants of my dinner sat undisturbed near the fire pit. Nothing looked out of place. No movement, no sound. But there, in the dirt near the edge of the clearing, was a disturbance. Shallow impressions in the soft earth that hadn't been there earlier. I shivered, brushing the thought away. Probably just a deer or a raccoon. Something harmless. I convinced myself it had to be. I ducked back into the tent and zipped it shut, turning off the flashlight and wrapping myself in the thin comfort of my sleeping bag. But sleep wouldn't come easily. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the nylon ceiling, every nerve on edge. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. It was hard to tell. Then I smelled it again, that musky, pungent odor I'd noticed earlier. It was stronger now, clinging to the still air like a warning. My mind raced, piecing together every outdoor safety tip I'd ever read. Bears. They could smell food from miles away. Had I been careless? Left something out? I pictured the backpack sitting so innocently by the tree and cursed myself for not hanging it higher. A sudden huffing sound cut through my thoughts, low and guttural, followed by a soft, snuffling noise. My blood turned to ice. It was close, so close I could hear the slow, deliberate breaths of something massive outside my tent. My hand instinctively reached for the canister of bear spray I'd stashed in the corner of the tent. My fingers closed around it, trembling. The creature's heavy steps moved around the campsite, circling, the sound impossibly loud in the silence of the night. The rhythmic crunch of leaves and twigs under its weight made my pulse race. At one point, it stopped directly beside the tent. I could hear its ragged breaths, feel the faint vibration of its steps. My mind screamed at me to stay still, to not make a sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The sounds faded into the forest, leaving only the deafening silence behind. I waited, my grip on the bear spray so tight my knuckles ached. Minutes stretched into hours, and still I didn't move, too afraid that any noise might draw it back. Eventually, the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, chasing away the shadows and some of the fear that had gripped me through the night. When I finally stepped out of the tent, the campsite felt different, heavier, as if the forest itself had borne witness to something it wouldn't soon forget. There, in the dirt just feet from my tent, were deep paw prints, impossibly large. And near the tree line, where the musky smell lingered strongest, I saw it. A pile of droppings, fresh and unmistakably bare. It had been close, too close. I spent the morning packing up camp, my movements brisk and uneasy, as though rushing might erase the memory of the night. But even as I hoisted my pack and set off on the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the dense maze of trees, it was still watching, still waiting. The next morning, I decided to venture deeper into the park, following a faint trail that the map marked as scenic but challenging. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and damp earth invigorating. For hours, I trekked through the wilderness, losing myself in the sheer beauty of it all. The forest, which had been alive with the chatter of birds and the rustle of leaves, grew unnervingly silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, predatory. And then I saw it, a paw print, massive, pressed deep into the soil. I crouched down to get a closer look, my stomach tightening. It wasn't fresh, but it was recent enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I'd seen bear tracks before, but this was something else entirely, bigger, heavier. I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The trail ahead seemed darker now, more foreboding. I considered turning back, but shook the thought away. I wasn't going to let a little paranoia ruin my trip. That night, the forest erupted into a cacophony of sounds, snapping twigs, low growls that vibrated through the still air, and the unmistakable crunch of heavy footsteps circling the camp. The firelight flickered, casting eerie, shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I sat frozen, every muscle tensed, as if paralyzed by the oppressive weight of the night. The bear spray was clutched tightly in one hand, a flashlight in the other. My knuckles ached from the grip, my thumb nervously poised over the button. My breaths came shallow and quick, each exhale clouding in the frigid air. My eyes darted to every corner of the darkness, straining to pierce the thick veil of the forest, but it felt as if the trees themselves were conspiring to keep whatever lurked hidden. And then it appeared. A massive, hulking silhouette emerged at the edge of the firelight, just beyond its flickering reach. It loomed impossibly large, its fur blending into the shadows, but the eyes, those eyes glinted like twin embers in the dark, catching the faint light with a malevolent gleam. They locked onto mine, unblinking, their intent unmistakable. I could feel its presence like a physical force, bearing down on me, filling the air with a suffocating tension that pressed against my chest. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the crackling of the fire and the distant rustle of leaves. The air was electric, charged with the primal energy of predator and prey. Then it charged. The creature exploded forward with terrifying speed, its massive form barreling toward me, each step shaking the ground like a drumbeat of impending doom. A guttural roar tore through the night, a sound so primal and raw that it struck me to my core. I fumbled with the bear spray, my fingers trembling as I tried to aim. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on as the beast closed the distance. I pressed the button just as it lunged. A cloud of burning spray erupted into the air, hitting its mark. The bear recoiled, letting out a deafening, bone-rattling roar that reverberated through the forest. It reared back, swiping at the air with massive claws, its rage palpable. My entire body trembled, the sound of its fury vibrating through my chest like an earthquake. For a moment, I thought it might charge again, but instead, it stumbled back, shaking its massive head violently, and retreated into the shadows. The darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the echoes of its roar and the faint rustling of disturbed undergrowth. But I knew it wasn't gone, not for good. The forest fell into an unnatural silence, as though holding its breath. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too deeply, afraid that any sound might call it back. The fire flickered weakly, casting dim, wavering light that seemed far too fragile against the oppressive dark. My hand still clutched the bear spray, my finger trembling over the nozzle. My legs felt like jelly, too weak to stand, but I forced myself to move closer to the fire, desperate for its feeble protection. Hours passed, though I couldn't say how many. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind through the trees sent fresh waves of terror coursing through me. I could still feel its presence out there, lurking just beyond the firelight, watching, waiting. By the time dawn's first light broke through the trees, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and my body ached from sitting in the same cramped position all night. I didn't dare step away from the fire's remnants until the sunlight filtered fully into the clearing, its warmth chasing away the shadows. Only then did I rise, my legs shaky and my heart still racing. Around the edge of the camp, the ground was littered with deep claw marks and heavy paw prints, each one larger than my spread hand. A tree near the fire bore fresh gouges, its bark stripped away in jagged, angry streaks. The bear had been here, and it had meant to stay. But what chilled me the most was the absence of food. The bear hadn't taken my provisions, hadn't ripped apart my belongings in search of sustenance. No, this wasn't about food. It had come for me, and I knew it would come again. The next day was a blur of fear and exhaustion. The first rays of dawn barely touched the treetops when I packed up camp, my hands shaking as I stuffed everything haphazardly into my bag. I was determined to put as much distance as possible between myself and that bear, but no matter how fast I walked, no matter how far I thought I'd gone. The oppressive feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. The forest seemed darker, even in the daylight. Every rustling leaf and snapping twig set my nerves on edge, each sound twisting my thoughts into fresh waves of paranoia. By midday, sweat dripped from my brow, and my legs burned with the effort of hiking through the uneven terrain. Somewhere along the way, I realized I'd lost the trail entirely. The map was useless without landmarks to guide me, and every direction looked the same, a tangled mess of trees and undergrowth stretching endlessly in every direction. Panic began to set in, my breaths shallow and quick. I forced myself to stop, to think, but my mind was a chaotic mess of fear and fatigue. The oppressive silence of the forest pressed in around me, broken only by the hammering of my heartbeat in my ears. And then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl, so close it felt like it vibrated through the ground beneath me. It was the kind of sound that freezes you in place, instinct screaming at you to flee even as your body refuses to move. Slowly, I turned, my chest tightening as my eyes scanned the trees. And there it was, the bear. It was larger than life, a towering mass of muscle and fur that seemed to fill the clearing. Its coat was matted and uneven, patches of fur caked with mud and blood, whether its own or another creature's, I couldn't tell. Its shoulders rolled with every step, the raw power in its movements unmistakable. Jagged scars crisscrossed its snout, and one ear was torn, as if it had seen countless battles and emerged the victor every time. But it was the eyes that truly chilled me. They weren't the dull animal eyes I'd expected. They were sharp, calculating, filled with an unnatural intelligence that seemed out of place in a creature so primal. Those eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as if it could see straight into my thoughts, into my fear. They didn't just look at me, they hunted me, a predator sizing up its prey. Its massive jaws hung slightly open, revealing yellowed, jagged teeth that seemed too large for its mouth. Drool dripped from its muzzle, glistening as it caught the light. Its breath came in heavy snorts, each exhale steaming in the cool air. Time seemed to slow as the bear lowered its head, its muscles coiling like a loaded spring. My mind screamed at me to run, but for a moment, I was paralyzed, caught in the predator's gaze. Then, with a sudden lurch of movement, it stepped forward, its massive paws crushing the underbrush beneath them. The sound was deafening in the stillness, a deliberate, menacing crunch that sent a jolt of terror through me. That was when my body finally obeyed. I ran. Branches whipped at my face and arms as I tore through the forest, the terrain a blur of green and brown. My lungs burned with every breath, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Behind me, the bear roared, a sound so deep and guttural it shook me to my core. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear it, its heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, the snapping of branches as it bulldozed its way through the trees. It was gaining on me. The forest felt like a labyrinth, each turn leading to another wall of dense vegetation, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The bear's snarls grew louder, closer, its breath hot on the back of my neck, or at least it felt that way. My mind raced, searching for some kind of escape, some way to outpace the relentless creature behind me. And then, ahead of me, the forest thinned, revealing a steep slope that plunged downward into a rocky ravine. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was the only one I had. Without hesitation, I leapt, tumbling and sliding down the slope, sharp rocks tearing at my clothes and skin. Pain flared in my ankle as I landed hard at the bottom, but I forced myself to scramble to my feet. Above me, the bear stood at the edge of the ravine, its massive form silhouetted against the sky. For a moment, it stared down at me, its eyes gleaming with that same unsettling intelligence. Then it let out another earth-shaking roar, the sound reverberating through the ravine like a death knell. I didn't wait to see if it would follow. Limping now, I pushed myself forward, deeper into the unknown wilderness, the knowledge that it was still out there, a relentless, unstoppable force, driving me onward. The forest became an endless maze of trees and tangled undergrowth, branches clawing at my face and arms as I sprinted blindly through the wilderness. My breathing came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out all other sound, except the bear. Its snarls tore through the still air, a guttural, bone-chilling reminder of how close it was. Each crashing footfall behind me grew louder, the ground trembling under its massive weight as it closed the gap. I tripped and staggered, the uneven terrain conspiring against me, but adrenaline kept me moving. My legs burned, my vision blurred with panic. But then, almost by some cruel twist of fate, I broke free from the undergrowth. Ahead of me, a narrow path carved its way through the forest, leading to a steep incline. At the top, the roar of a waterfall pierced through the chaos, its spray glittering in the faint light. I scrambled up the incline, slipping on loose dirt and rocks, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. Behind me, the bear barreled forward, its guttural growls growing more furious as it saw its prey within reach. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to keep moving. At the summit, the waterfall loomed, an endless cascade of frothing, icy water plunging into the abyss below. I didn't think. I couldn't. The bear's roar echoed behind me, impossibly close now. Without hesitation, I launched myself forward, leaping into the torrent. The icy water hit me like a wall, stealing the air from my lungs and numbing my body instantly. The current seized me, sweeping me away in its relentless grip. My head broke the surface just in time to see the bear reach the edge, its massive frame illuminated against the falling water. It paced for a moment, snarling as it stared down, its rage almost palpable. Then, as the current carried me farther away, the bear faded from view, but the terror of its presence lingered, etched into every fiber of my being. When I finally dragged myself onto the muddy shore, battered and shivering, the bear was gone. Yet the forest around me still pulsed with an eerie, predatory silence. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made me flinch, my eyes darting to the shadows. The wilderness wasn't empty. It was watching, waiting, as if deciding whether to let me leave. I forced myself to limp forward, the searing pain in my ankle a cruel rhythm with each step. The faint glimmer of sunlight filtering through the dense canopy became my guide, a fragile promise that somewhere, out there, safety might exist. Time blurred as I staggered through the undergrowth, exhaustion threatening to overtake me at every turn. Hours later, I stumbled into a clearing, my legs giving way beneath me. A figure moved toward me, uniformed, purposeful, a park ranger. His expression shifted from concern to shock, then to something almost reverent. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice low, like he couldn't believe his own words. Lucky didn't even begin to cover it. The wilderness doesn't care about your plans, your confidence, or how prepared you think you are. It's raw, untamed, and utterly indifferent to whether you survive. I came to Missinaibi Lake searching for peace, for an escape from the chaos of life. Instead, I found something far more powerful, a deep respect for the wild and a chilling understanding of how close I came to becoming part of it forever.